Welcome back. As I was working my way through my new book, 100 Endgames You Must Know by Jesus de la Villa, I came across this sentence in the introduction, which he gives as a warning. I assume the reader knows the basic mates and the bishop plus wrong rook's pawn ending. I wasn't quite sure what he meant by bishop plus wrong rook's pawn ending, so I looked it up, and hopefully it'll help me to solidify and internalize the knowledge that I gained from this by making sort of a teaching video about it. Now, the reason up here it does not say wrong rook's pawn is because wrong bishop fits better in my three-line title, and also because sometimes it's called that. Here on the board I have a position set up where black has, well, both sides have a king, but black has also a pawn, 2 squares from promotion, and a bishop. But the bishop is the wrong color to guard the promotion square. That's why I call it the wrong color bishop, because this might not even be the pawn changes color every square. The color of the pawn doesn't matter. But anyway, the idea here is that black can't win if white stays right here and shuffles back and forth between these spaces. So even if this pawn started off back here and this bishop started off back here, whatever, the black king was back here and the white king was over here someplace, as this pawn advances and this king comes toward it, as long as the king gets to one of these squares in front of this pawn before any of these other pieces can, the pawn can't promote. For example, it doesn't matter whose turn it is either, is what I learned when I looked this up. If you want to, Wikipedia has an entire article about the wrong rook pawn. So feel free to read through that if you want to buff up this knowledge. But I had to set which player had a turn here, so I set it as white's turn. But so if white moves here, then there's not much that black can do. If black puts this bishop here, for example, white's only move is to go up 1. And black has to be really careful. They're about to lose this pawn. If white just makes a move like this, well, I take this pawn, and we know that already, or you should know, that black cannot checkmate with just a bishop and a king. So they've got to protect the pawn. So back up a square. If white moves here, black has to move here to protect this pawn, or protect the pawn in some other way. And now I only have one legal move, which is to come back. If black pushes the pawn, I'll capture it, and we're back in that situation. So they won't push the pawn. Oh, they have to make a bishop move. Okay, well, now I can move here. Again, they can push the pawn now, protected by the bishop, but I'll just get in front of it. And because this bishop does not see the corner square, it can never kick the king out of the corner. And black has to be really careful and just wait and hope that I will move. The only way that black can win is if I voluntarily march my king out of the way so this pawn can promote. As long as you stay here, it's a draw. And the same thing is true on the other side of the board. Now you see we have a similar position on the opposite side of the board. This time it's obviously white's move because white is in check right now. But again, white shuffles. This bishop is the wrong color. In this case, it's a light squared bishop and the corner square is dark. In the other case, we had a dark squared bishop and a light squared corner that the pawn had to promote to. But with this pawn on the A file or the H file and a king in front of it, the enemy king in front of it, it can't promote, and black can't force my king out of these squares. Now here, again, black has to be very careful not to stalemate me. If they move here, I have no legal moves. I can't go any of those spaces. So they wouldn't do that. They would shuffle the bishop. Well, now I can come back here. And again, we run into the situation that you saw on the other side of the board. If black advances this pawn where it's protected by the bishop, I just move to get in front of it. And again, black's going to have to be very careful not to give me, not to stalemate me. Well, for example, say if they check me here, I move in front of it. Where's this king going to go? This king has to go somewhere where it's not guarding that square, because I can't move forward because the pawn. I can't move because of the bishop, and I can't move sideways because of the pawn, and I can't move here because of the king. So black's next move has to be getting away from this square to let me out. Okay, so I get out. If they promote, I just capture it. And again, nobody can checkmate with a king and a bishop, so it's a draw, as long as white stays near the corner. Backing up, best idea here would be for black to not push this pawn and just to hover the king near it. But we're going to either repeat moves or hit the 50 move rule or end up with insufficient material if they advance this pawn at some point. For example, if they advance the pawn now, I don't have any legal moves, so black has to do something. If they move here, it's a stalemate. If they move here, it's a stalemate. So they have to move the king away, in which case I capture the pawn. Black has insufficient material, and it's a draw. So anyway, that was something that was a prerequisite for the book that I'm working my way through, the Jesus de la Villa 100 Endgames You Must Know. And as I learned this, hopefully I have taught it well to you too, because when I present something as I'm teaching it, it helps me to internalize it and to understand it. And the fact is that if the bishop is the wrong color to guard the promotion square of a pawn on the A file or the H file, and the white king manages to get in front of it, it's going to be a draw. Now, if my white king was behind it, that's an entirely different situation. Obviously, in that case, the pawn could just promote. So think about this when you're in an endgame, and I'm going to try to keep it in mind, because at some point this pawn's going to be way back here, and this bishop's going to be way back here, and this king's going to be way back here, and my king's going to be over here someplace. And I'm going to need to try to get in front of that pawn, knowing that that's the wrong colored bishop to guard this square, and vice versa if it's on the other side. Thank you for watching. I hope you learned something. I'm going to try to keep this in mind for future games.